Hello everyone. As you may know, Mythbusters probably the biggest influence on the Slow Mo Guys channel, and I'm very happy to be in the Tested Cave with Adam Savage.
This is your first visit to the cave.
It is. We've worked together a few times.
I'm sorry that it has been this long to get you here.
No problem at all. I'm just happy to be in here. So I thought we would just chat a little bit about slow mo and Mythbusters, because you've been doing slow mo longer than I have.
You know, it was so funny in the early days. It didn't even, for the pilots, we never even thought about a slow motion camera.
Right.
It was, because this is the June, July of 2002. There was absolutely nothing. And then when they showed up to shoot the first season, we had this ancient high-speed camera. I was telling you yesterday, we were on a shoot a couple days ago in hot weather.
Yeah.
And I was saying that first high-speed camera was something like 40 minutes to upload every shot to the computer.
Even if it was a tiny little...
You couldn't adjust the size of the shot. It was either like, it was pre, middle, or post-trigger, and it grabbed what it grabbed, 2 seconds at 1,000 frames or something like that.
Yeah.
And I mean, it would... Waiting on high speed was the repeated litany of the early seasons.
Waiting on high speed.
Waiting on high speed.
I've been the cause of waiting on high speed quite a lot in my career. Because back when I started, so I first used a Phantom in 2004.
Right.
And then started working with them properly in 2006. But back then it was called a Phantom V5 we were using, and didn't have any buttons, had to use a laptop.
Right.
Gigabit Ethernet. So if you saved the whole RAM, you could trim when I started, but if you saved the whole thing, it was like, all right, that's basically lunch again.
Right.
The first Iron Man movie, the camera he talks to that's on the robot arm,
Yeah.
is actually a very early Phantom.
I didn't realize that.
It's not plugged in. You can see all the ports in the back just bare. But it was like the first time I was like, oh, I know what that camera is in that film. Very cool.
Apparently, that scene, well, Johnny Jr. said this in an interview, and Jon Favreau confirmed it to me. They were both inspired by Mythbusters to keep those scenes in Iron Man. Like, the studio was like, can't we just cut to the suit working? And they were like, no, we need this iterative process. We've got to show.
That's exactly it. So I feel like when I started my channel in 2010, I assumed that the Mythbusters approach was the approach to this kind of content. It was just how it should be done. And I didn't really read into it. I just, based on my watching it, the values I took from Mythbusters was, you know, show the goal,
Right.
show the process, show the iterations, and show the reactions.
Yeah.
And then you basically, the story just comes together very naturally, as real as possible.
Yeah.
And that's how I basically just copied your work, really.
We had this wonderful producer, Alice, who would make out this this sort of 4-level chart, and it was like 3-level chart. It was like pre-experiment, during the experiment, post-experiment. What do you think's going to happen? What has happened up till now? What is the best thing that could happen? What is the worst thing that could happen? What is happening right now? How's it going? What's the worst thing? What's the best thing? Is Jamie upsetting you or whatever? Yeah. And then we've had days where, when we were doing, I think one of our all-time greatest high-speed episodes was the Bullet Drop versus Fired. And that was one in which our executive producer, Dan Topster, is the one who insisted we need both happening in one frame. I hadn't thought that we needed both in one frame, and this was like a really important linchpin of my evolution as a producer, because he was totally right.
Yeah.
And it took 4 days to get that shot. And when we finally got it, it was around 2 p.m., but Jamie and I shot pieces to camera for another 3 hours. Because Alice really wanted to make sure the edit team, anything they wanted to cut, had been talked about and addressed by both of us before, during, and after.
Do you think, is that the high-speed shot that you were most excited to go and watch of all of Mythbusters, or is there one that stands out as like, I can't wait to go over to the laptop and look at this?
First of all, as you know, going over to the laptop to look at it is always the most fun part, right? Like, and we would, because that initial reaction you have is so unique, especially if it's a spectacular shot or some really cool artifact is happening. You got to get it in situ. You can't fake that reaction. I think among my favorite high-speed shots, honestly, Jamie smacking me in the face is so spectacular, and that's an old Phantom.
Yeah.
And we put that in our Mythbusters science exhibition. You could actually ramp through the slap. It's deeply satisfying, especially later years when Phantoms got faster and you could go find your footage and you could, like, the whip breaking the speed of sound was one that was only possible because we were looking for 4 frames.
Right.
You know? I also love, we did an explosion one where Jamie and I both painted with explosives. And I did this kind of clown wig, this execution that is one of my favorite high speeds. One of the evolutions I had for high speed that grew out of an evolution of second cameras, right? So we would shoot an episode and have as many as 15 or 16 other cameras going. And it was rare that we'd have that many, but for a big driving thing like our finale, absolutely that many. And I started realizing as I was watching the episodes that it was really important to me from a communication standpoint that each camera's shot told you the story of what was going to happen in that shot. So just like a Roadrunner episode where you see the bowl here and the road going down, there's no mistaking what's about to happen. That's why in the latter seasons of Mythbusters you see lots more colored tape, lots more arrows, lots more guiding your eye into what's going to happen, so that when that high-speed shot happens, you can just enjoy the most important part.
Right. And I think unintentionally that would be phenomenal for like social content nowadays, where you don't necessarily have all the time to tell the story. So you're probably like predicting the future a little bit there.
I actually find pictures online so regularly enraging that I just shot a video of about just seeing something. But I was like really saying to people, like, because we can take pictures with this stuff, we think, there, I've taken a picture of it. You haven't. You need to look at it and go, can I clearly see what I've taken a picture of? And the answer is almost always no.
No, because you're not.
And the number of people that post a picture of something like, I got good work done today. And I'm like, I don't even know what scale this is or what planet it's on.
This tells no story.
None at all. The other thing that was really fun for our camera team was shooting the Mythbuster interstitials. Yeah,
like the big metal text and all that stuff.
And like eggs hitting it, paintballs hitting the logo.
You were saying that the team tried over and over again to get the logo on a baseball.
Yeah, we were doing Can You Knock the Hide Off a Baseball? And we were filming, I can't remember why we were filming in this exterior location, but Scott and the team had like 2 or 3 hours on their own while we were doing other stuff. And Scott asked Don Best, our builder at the time, to throw this baseball, and Don had to throw that baseball like 300 times over 4 hours. He was so tired.
So sore.
And the whole goal was to get that logo to like come into focus at the right moment.
So there's so many variables there. There's like the accuracy, then there's the rotation at the point of focus.
Yep.
And also just the positioning of whether it's upside down or not, I guess. I can't imagine how many.
He did tons of those. And again, it was like, what a luxury that we had this structure where they could just go off and screw around for a while and get this amazing stuff.
And I'm sure the order to get that stuff was just like, just go and get a bunch of cool stuff. And they could then just creatively think of a bunch of things.
If we had never turned out any of those, that would have been fine. But the fact that we were continually turning them out was super, super awesome.
I wish I could take our camera and send it back in time to you in like 2004.
Oh my God, no, seriously. We didn't have above 1,000 frames per second for years.
Yeah, same. I think up until 3 years ago, I was mainly using the 4K Phantom, which was still 1,000 frames.
Yeah.
And that frame rate is great for people, so good for human movement. But for example, if you break a sheet of glass, 1 frame, even in slow-mo, just
one frame.
All gone.
And some of your guys' stuff of that, the propagation of tempered glass shatters, and some of the stuff Destin has done on the Prince Rupert drop. I feel like the highest frame rate we practically worked with was in the latter half of 6 figures, like 50 to 100,000 frames.
Yeah.
We might have gone to a very high frame rate for that very last explosion. The 5,001 pounds of AMPHO we did at New Mexico Tech. We destroyed 3 rental cars with that one explosion. There's one, a giant chunk of steel fell out of the sky and tore off the front left fender of this car. And I just kept picturing the car rental repair shop going, What were you in a Michael Bay movie? And the answer is yes, 100%. I think that when we were starting to do stuff like underwater explosions using blasting caps, which are some of my favorite
Incredible.
stuff to
The
watch.
big sphere.
Oh, just fabulous.
Love that.
Those are so much better at like 5,000 frames per second than they are at 1,000.
Yeah.
You get, that's the real thing that happens after 1,000 is you get to really start to watch shock waves occur. And the shock wave propagation was one of my all-time favorite things to witness on the high speed.
Shockwaves, I think, are the most sci-fi looking thing to see, because it's in reality. Everyone can stare at an explosion with their eyes, at a safe distance. And then just the fact that there was this whole other thing there that everyone missed. I love that. And sometimes you can see the shockwaves bouncing off the ground. You'll see like
The
second
bubble.
and third shockwaves and just big
You can
domes.
see shapes of shockwaves being affected by the softness of the ground or
It's
water.
insane. And even light will refract through it slightly differently too. It's bizarre.
High-speed cameras gave me a window into physics that nothing else could have. They allowed me, and specifically being in control of them, being able to like take this footage and mess with it was so important to my development as an engineer and a scientist on the show. I'm curious if there's like a particular view on the world high-speed cameras have given you, like something you've taken away from them.
I think it's actually taught me to doubt things less. For example, in The Matrix where the helicopter crashes into the building?
Yeah. Oh.
And it kind of goes like, and it kind of looks like, they kind of...
I did the same thing. When that movie came out and you see the glass
Yeah.
ripple like that, I was like, not really.
Years later, I had Dan throw a hammer into a mirror at like 200,000 frames a second. And to the point where it's like, the hammer's like this. You can barely tell the hammer's moving, and then it kind of touches the mirror. Exact same thing. Just big like ripple came out like this. And I was like, and then it cracks into the ripple. So,
Yeah.
so you end up with big cracks, and then there's like a circle of small cracks. And the small cracks happen into that ripple zone. And I was just like, did the people who worked on The Matrix know this? Did they have access to this kind of speed, or did they just make a good prediction or a good simulation?
I'm trying to remember, but there's definitely a story from us using the high speed where there was a film that got it right and there was no way they could have known, but they just figured it out and nailed it.
It's kind of like when they were doing the interstellar black hole stuff, and they were basically just going off descriptions from
Right.
incredibly smart people.
Yeah,
To the
Kip
point
Thorne
when-
and this- yeah.
and then when we actually get visual on a real black hole, it's like, that's the exact same. They absolutely nailed it.
It is, at one point I remember early on, when we were still dealing with 1,000 frames per second, we were doing a story in which we needed faster feedback from the high-speed shot. And so I said to one of our producers, call the 49ers. Like, there is like 20 of the camera that we want sitting on their sidelines right now, right? These are rentals. They use them for sports programming. They have instant replay of slow-mo of people throwing baseballs, so it's got to be something you can do. And again, this is like 2006, 2007. Those cameras were thousands and thousands of dollars per day to rent.
Yeah. I used to rent this camera before I got it, and it was every day, just seeing the dollars tick every day. I was like, we got to shoot so much in 2 days. 'Cause, my God.
It was a big line item each year. Each time the production company upgraded our Phantom, that was
Because that was the thing that we dealt with a couple of days ago when we were working together on a series of videos, is that we were watching the playback seconds after it happened.
Yeah.
And you were like, remember when it was like, it took time to queue it up, and even to the point where you could watch it was minutes.
minutes.
Can't believe how fast you can move through it.
Yeah, it's not like the old days.
No.
I was watching you scrub to the key part of the shot. So when we did, one of my favorite methodologies was catching a whip's tip breaking the speed of sound. And to do this, I got good at whipping at a pretty regular rate, and we built a grid, and we filmed that wide at 1,000 frames per second. And then with the grid, we were able to see where our focus should be, and it was just a progression. And then we nailed it. And each time we had to go find the 4 frames of the whip breaking this sound barrier was like 30 minutes of back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, trying to get in there. And then it turns out, Neil Stevenson told me this, in Seven Eves, his book about the moon breaking into pieces, there's a whole thing about whips in the latter half of the book. And Neil is a deep researcher, and he went and found this Frenchman who got a photo of a whip's tip breaking the speed of sound in the 1920s.
Was it like some sort of high-speed flash situation?
Yeah, and it was. I can't even remember how he was activating the timers, but it was crazy primitive. And he did this with, like, I'm so embarrassed.
Well, I think that's what's quite interesting about the origins of high speed, is that I feel like quite a lot of photographic techniques were done all at the same time, like the Muybridge stuff. But he also kind of messed with time slice decades and decades ago.
The thing about Muybridge that I find really particularly fascinating, there's a wonderful book by Rebecca Solnit called River of Shadows, all about Muybridge. And so just to remind people, this is the famous answering of the question, do a horse's legs all leave the ground at the same time? And Leland Stanford of Stanford University wanted to answer this. He hired Muybridge, who was a famous nature photographer and panorama photographer, and asked him to solve this problem. And this is the 1870s. And photography, I don't think people realize that we think of photography as a post-1900 phenomenon, and it's like 1829 is the first photograph. So by 1870s, there was like 4 monthly photography magazines.
Isn't that crazy?
That you could subscribe to. And they talked all about different people's processes. And the biggest unsolved problem in Muybridge was doing these photographs was a fast exposure. No one had solved the problem of either the quick shutter or fast exposure. And Muybridge solved both in the answering of Leland Stanford's question. And there's this great description, and I really connected with this, and I would imagine you will too when you read it, is he's spending days just mixing up different chemistries on the plate of these collodion glass things and getting nothing. And then after like 3 days of endless attempts, they get a blurry light and they're like, they know where to go. It's like me finding the grid on the whip, right? And within the next day, they got an exposure that you saw a leg, and then it was just about dialing it in. And it was an electronic speed shutter, a curtain shutter. We still use this kind of shutter today. It's not super common, but like, I love those moments when someone was like, oh, the biggest problem in this thing that I'm fascinated by is this. I'm going to solve that problem.
It's insane. Yeah, I feel like it would have been so cool to be just a witness to that process. And just be like,
Totally.
I mean, the amount of time between the experimentation of that kind of thing, like mixing the chemicals, each version must have been so time consuming.
Right, because when you see the horse running and there's 17 frames, that's 17 wet plate cameras lined up next to each other with little, with strings going to electromechanical switches in 1870. I so much respect for that incredible iteration.
And there's just something about that kind of imagery, and I feel the same way about the Edgerton photo of like the bullet and the apple or the card. Completely iconic. I remember seeing the footage of Edgerton trying to shoot the card, the playing card, and he's kind of lined up on it and he misses. And it seems like everything's so precise. He's got all this high-speed flash set up.
A world expert on high-speed photography.
And then to adjust the shot, he just gets the rifle and goes. And I just love how like everything was so precise, but then his shot was just like, let me bash it over a little bit. It's such a funny approach.
I feel so lucky that we've got 200 and some odd frames per second on these things, because frankly, on the show, so many times, just like running downstairs and activating the high-speed camera and trying something would be the way we'd crack out, oh, this is the story we want to tell. This is the thing to focus on.
Yeah, I feel like I've made a few videos where there's one intention at the beginning, and then based on our first playback of Phantom, it's like, forget that. We found this other thing that we're doing.
Oh, here's a question for you. I have an answer to this. Is there a high-speed shot you were excited about getting that turned out to be impossible? Like, you thought you were going to see something, and then the reality of what you were filming, that was not what you were going to see.
This is something I'm currently working on. I did try this and it didn't work because I didn't have a powerful enough laser. But basically, at the max frame rate of my Phantom, which is 1.75 million frames a second.
This was like this
tiny
yeah,
slip
I was going to
like
say.
This. But I think at that speed, light moves something like 300 meters per frame.
I love this. Oh, you got to do that. 1.75 million frames per second.
It turns 1 second of real time into about 19 hours.
We were doing killer cable snap. Will a braided cable on a boat, when it gets stretched to its breaking point, the myth is that when it breaks, it'll whip through you like a samurai sword. And like, there's so many accounts of this happening that I was just, I can't wait to see the shot. I can't wait to see the close-up on a pig's flesh as this cable cleaves it in half. And we finished that day busting that entirely. It does not happen.
It just doesn't have enough.
It doesn't have enough energy. And we were using everything from like an 1/8 inch cable up to like a 3/8 inch cable, a big fat one, 1/4 inch. And there are so many ways cables can cut your body parts off on a boat, from pressures and movement and adjacent, boats and stuff like that. But whipping isn't one of them. So lots of people have lost limbs because of ropes and cables, but not like that.
But never from a snapped whip.
Yeah. And frankly, I'm still a little sad I didn't get to see that shot. I love the idea that physics could work like that.
Were you able to calculate how fast it would have to be moving to do so?
No, that kind of math wasn't the way I was thinking. It's a great question though, because it's certainly answerable.
If you could take today's Phantoms back to a myth that you shot for Mythbusters, and you could only pick one, what do you think it would be? Like, was there ever slow-mo that you were like, oh man, if we could only shoot 10 times slower?
Oh, that's great. I'm going to have to think about that. Honestly, the whip would have been so much
Very helpful.
faster to
Especially
take
when you're
care
dealing
of.
with 4 frames. It's like, what if that was 40 frames?
Exactly. Because I think what many people don't realize is as you increase the frame rate on these, your viewing port gets smaller and smaller in order to be able to process the same amount of information on pixels.
It's just always a bandwidth issue.
Yeah. And so like some of those incredibly high frame rates, the propagation of the speed of glass breaking blew my mind when you guys did that.
I still can't film it well. So I filmed it at like 800,000 frames a second, which is enough. If I'm wide enough, it's enough to see it go like. But if I want to get really close on like the decision making of the propagation, like if I want to see like one crack, it's still like because you're so zoomed in. So a lot of the time if I'm trying to film something really fast, I kind of have to get further away from it because you don't want the thing to travel across the sensor too quickly. Which means you get lower resolution.
But I would also imagine that with glass cracking like that, if you zoomed in really close and you had some polarization ability, you could witness some of the internal stresses inside the glass.
Like turning the
right, like the rainbowing of. You could choose a glass that maybe had more of a visual artifact of its internal stresses.
I think did Destin do that in his Rubens drop, where you see like the lines very close together and then they get further away from the way it's all.
I can't remember.
I can't remember either. But yeah, I think for glass, I would love to be shooting 10 million.
Good God! What is the fastest you would currently be able to rent access to now?
So there's a camera by Shimatsu. It can do up to 10 million frames a second, but the caveat is that it can only shoot 256 frames. So it's a triggering problem at all times. So you can't just. I'm lucky enough with the Phantoms that I've got, I can shoot 1.75 million for like 4 seconds, which doesn't sound like a lot, but when you're using that speed, the event is going to be very short, so it's usually plenty of time to press the trigger. But no human on Earth could trigger within 250 frames on 10 million frames a second. No one would ever be able to do that. So it's always like a laser trigger or a sound trigger. Right.
It's a mechanical.
Yeah.
And now you're reminding me of what I think is the coolest high-speed photograph ever, which is the 3rd nanosecond of the atomic bomb explosion, where you see the shack it's in, and then the next frame, it looks like a cell, right?
Yeah.
It looks like reality has shifted. And if I'm right, that camera was a barrel with like 40 unexposed frames of film around it, where the barrel spun up to like 100,000 RPM, and then they opened the frame.
So the barrel was like getting up to speed first, and then they could open it, and
and then they get whatever 30 frames.
It's insane. That's the kind of thing that I would like to film with a Phantom.
Right.
Like some of the old high-speed photography looks so good when filmed.
Yeah. I've said this, and I said this in the open source talk I gave last year, but like When we saw your guys' YouTube, I still remember Scott Sorensen being like, dude, some guys have started a YouTube channel with just slow-mo shots. And I'm like, oh, so jealous. The slow-mo camera was, no lie, the most fun part of producing the show.
Yeah, I've always loved the job because people, it sounds kind of lame, but on a set, people would be kind of stressed out throughout the day. You know, it's a set environment.
Right, yeah.
And people would like come over to my screen and get happy.
Yeah.
I'd be excited when everyone was huddled around. I was like, can everyone see? Everyone got it? All right, here we go. and it just really pleased people a lot of the time.
That, on the Bobby Fingers shoot, when Bobby's like, I want only one eye to come out.
That shoot was incredible. There were 2 moments where Bobby was asking for what, on paper, sounds like a lot. He wanted a goose to come out at an exact speed.
Yeah.
And when it hit the face, he wanted just one eye to pop out.
And like, manna from heaven for me.
Your first shot was, I think, 1 mile an hour off the speed he wanted, just based on you going like, well, you know, Mythbusters experience.
Yeah.
Boof. And then you got one eye to come out.
That was like, again, I said this yesterday when we were on the set. I was like, chimping at the high-speed camera screen is the most fun part.
This was always the best part about doing the show. Yeah. Chimping over the high speed after the thing.
It was great. I think that's my favorite moment in my video from the Bobby Finger stuff, is where, and Daniel edited this all together, where we've all got our phones, we're trying to figure out based on how big it was in the frame and the speed, taking the frame rate, and we're all just like, you could almost see the numbers. And I think it took me so long to say it out loud because I was like, well, it's like 70.
Yeah,
Is that right? Like, we
right
nailed
there.
it the first time.
Yeah, I literally nailed it on the first try.
That was, you know, the old school, and I said this in the video, like, it was so much fun to go back to that kind of framework, to be in a hot place doing difficult stuff with people I like,
Yeah.
having fun.
It was incredible. And I think the biggest takeaway from the comments on my video of that is it's so good to see Adam in that environment again. Just doing what they know you for.
Okay, so just given that, I want to express that, like, for me, it was so terrifying. And really specifically, you know, people asked, oh, were the explosions the best part about doing the show? And the answer is no. Watching the explosions was the best part. But doing them, terrifying. Mm-hmm. And, you know, we had experts, but of course the crew was listening to me and Jamie. Not that they weren't listening to the experts, of course they were. But they also really trusted Jamie and I about where to be, where to go safely. And we took that really seriously, and thus only after the explosion did we relax our sphincters.
Yeah, and you took on that role for our Bobby Fingers collab, where you brought the thing. You didn't want to send the thing without
No,
you.
I didn't want to, but I needed, the whole time I was making that air cannon, I needed a Jamie Heineman to be arguing with me about it. So I spent all this time being like, how are you being stupid? How am I being stupid? What am I forgetting? Because again, I'm taking this pressure vessel out to people I like, and I want to make sure no one gets hurt by it, right?
Very understandable.
And I was very cognizant, like I used to have this machine of 25 people to help me make sure that was safe.
But you've got all of the knowledge of how to pull that off as a single person, because you're like, okay, we need this. So I got some stuff, and then you brought some stuff in a little trunk, and you're like, we've got to get these pipe stands, which I didn't know was a thing.
Yeah.
Phenomenal. Still got those. Thanks for those.
Absolutely. I love, again, also, this is something where there was no sense from us on the show at all that this was anything but better for us and the world, that there were more people shooting high-speed shots of cool, weird shit. And I want even more of that. So one of the things I loved about doing that shoot was giving you guys some of my institutional knowledge about how to get ready to set up for whatever you might need in situ. And I found the same thing. I went on to one of Derek Muller's exterior shoots a couple of years ago, and it was the same of like, oh, I really want people to know the stuff that we learned about how to do this stuff safely.
It is great to have a piece of knowledge that can be so useful to people in a very specific situation. Like I've probably set more mousetraps than most people on Earth who aren't in pest control. And I found that you could set like 100 mousetraps, and then you'll just have that one that wasn't set quite right, and you'll put it down, and it'll go, and it'll ruin all the time you put in. And I was doing a shoot with someone else who wanted mousetraps in high speed, and they kept having this problem. They were doing it in segments, and they would constantly set them all off. And I was like, after you set each trap, give it a little shake. And what they'll do is it'll set it off, or it'll snap it into being perfectly set. And that's something I learned just from constantly failing at doing it. You just take the mousetrap and you go, ah, that's good.
Wow.
They never had another problem again. It's a very specific experience. And you have that in so many different directions.
I went up and gave a talk at Blue Origin back in, I think, 2018. They asked me to come up and talk to the team. And as I was getting ready to go, one of their engineering team asks me for an extra hour. Like, we would just love to pick your brain for an hour before you give your talk. And I'm like, okay, but I don't know what in here is useful to you all. And it turned out what they were really interested in was exactly what Mythbusters was a machine for rapid iteration of experimental methodologies. And that machine involved associate producers who had a ton of autonomy over the story we were telling. They were, each story got an AP that worked with Jamie or I. One of us would take the lead on each story. And find us the experts and find us the stuff, but then also manage the relationships with the vendors and as you know, location is everything. And maintaining a good relationship with your location is what gives you the freedom to do the weird crap you want to do when you only have one day to go get a permit, right?
Right.
And just that turned out to be what they really wanted to know. Could I set it up in a parking lot? Yes, you can. Here's what you're going to need. And even up to helping young YouTubers understand that it's great and well and good to do it on your phone and all of that stuff. And when it becomes time to mature and go out with a real camera crew, it's about 10 grand a day to film out on the street in the world. And it's really hard to make it less expensive than that when you're paying for people and insurance and all of that stuff.
I love the moment that thing you said on the shoot 2 days ago, in that we were basically doing an experiment where something was supposed to land in a specific spot, and it didn't the first time. And
It never does.
And you got a great smile on your face because you were like, back in the day, it'd be on me to figure out the engineering behind why that didn't work. But now I can just be like, well, that's
Yeah, I wonder how they're going to solve that problem. I was saying, specifically, we're on this shoot where I'm just a face, right?
Yeah.
I'm talking about what's going on, but I don't have to engineer it. And there's some really clever and smart people doing this setup. But yeah, it was great not to have to also be running the full engineering brain at the same time.
So what would go through, so on Mythbusters, say something, been building up to it for a day, didn't quite work. Was your immediate response in your brain to be like, I need to solve the problem in a certain way? Or was it to be, hey, I'm on camera, I'm going to react as talent first and then think about it? Did you have a process?
No, both of those things were the same.
Okay.
And that was the
That's the best thing
loveliness
about the show,
about doing the show was, for both Jamie and I, that kind of, the pressure of having to think while the camera's rolling, it's not easy. It takes a lot of energy. And it takes a structure of a crew you really know and who knows you, and that simpatico comfort is absolutely paramount. So on a film set, when I was doing special effects or doing a special effects gag, everything is about what ends up on camera. So I was always thinking from that vein on the show. And the difference is I've got to get it to happen on camera for real. I can fake it if I have to. And we never did. But that mindset of okay, what are the parameters for getting the shot that I want? And frequently there'd be a moment where it wouldn't work. And sometimes it'd be I would be up in my office writing and Jamie's downstairs supervising a high-speed shot, or vice versa, and it doesn't go right, and one of us who's downstairs will come up and get the other one. Come take a look at this. Tell me what you see. Tell me what you think. And there would just be a consultation of okay, what we were hoping to get, we won't get. That's often the thing you learn immediately. It's what I wanted is not going to happen. But this part is really cool, so let's go into that thing and see what we can get. Do you know what we never messed with on the show was Schlieren lenses?
Yeah. With
Have
the razor and the mirror and the...
Yeah, so this is a process by which you can see smoke and air currents in a frame by using polarization, I think.
I've never used it.
We never did either. That's one of the two things we didn't, that I'm still sad about. That Schlieren lenses, because what they give you in terms of air currents in a space are really cool, the fluid dynamics. And the other one was we never did a water hammer. You know what a water hammer is?
It protects the...
No. Water hammer is if you're making, if you're having a whole bunch of stuff flow through a pipe and then shut it off, the momentum of the water behind your shutoff is real and can actually burst pipes.
But isn't that why they have the little extension things sticking up to like relieve pressure.
Yeah, exactly. And you can use it as a reliable way of making pipes burst with the right amount of pressure. And we never did that. I don't know why.
Well, if you ever want to.
Is there so you have already said that you like glass breaking at 10 million frames per second is a personal goal. Is there
Yeah.
another?
I
is
want to
there-
be doing slow-mo long enough to be able to shoot 10 million.
I'm curious if there's some other holy grail of. I just saw a guy who did something kind of the opposite of what we do with high speed. He wanted to show the peeling process of metal. And so he built a tiny little micron adjustable thing with an insert tool for cutting aluminum. And he allowed it so that with a turn of the dial, it moved the cutting blade about 10 microns, about half a thousandth of an inch. And he was able to register that in a scanning electron microscope.
Wow.
So you get to see the lines of the metal grains crawling and crushing over each other as the blade is cutting through.
I think I like I really love slow-mo, but I like anything that lets me see something in a completely different way, like microscopes, electron microscopes, definitely, like thermal, time-lapse even.
Yep.
I love it. It's just, I just love seeing there was a great documentary called The Invisible World. Did you ever see that?
I know. I did not.
I think it was a National Geographic thing from the 80s or something, but yeah, super cool.
All high
It
microscope.
was like someone, before I was born, said, let's make everything Gavin loves in a documentary.
Dude, what a pleasure. Like, just to know you as a colleague, as a fellow creator, and also to get to play together in this wonderful landscape
I
we're
hope
in.
we get to do it more, and if you ever need a Phantom, I'll ship this to you.
100%.
Thanks so much.
Absolutely, man.